Chapter 9. Hook's Revenge. The sword whizzed past his ear. It just missed his neck, but not by much. Barry didn't wait for the sword to stab at him again. He flung the gross, wet hair back into the sink, turned, grabbed his backpack, and bolted from the science lab, slamming the door behind him. The image of the sword slashing out of the sink kept replaying in his mind as he dashed down the hall, just trying to get away. His heart jackhammered in his chest. "It's not real," he whispered to himself. "It can't be real." He sprinted with his backpack bouncing on his shoulders. The fluorescent lights beat down on him. The halls were deserted, and everything felt eerie and unsettling. Where was everyone? And then he remembered. The final bell was about to ring, and he was running away from his classroom. A new wave of panic crashed through him. He couldn't afford to be marked tardy. He turned around, his sneakers squeaking on the linoleum, and slammed right into somebody. Actually, two somebodies. "Whoa, watch where you're going," Michael yelped with Barry barreled into him, knocking him back into John. His two friends bumped heads. "What's wrong?" John said, rubbing his forehead and grimacing in pain. You look like you've seen a ghost." "Dude, yeah," Michael added, eyes wide. "You haven't looked this freaked out since we made you watch that scary clown movie. And we all know the circus is your worst nightmare," John added with a snort. "Oh, and giant killer sharks. But that's Rita's fault. We do not accept the blame for that phobia." Barry stared at his friends in confusion. Their usual banter felt out of place in the midst of his panic. He couldn't tell them the truth, that it was possible he had, in fact, seen a ghost. Of course, he knew ghosts weren't real. Even in his books, the brothers always ended up discovering the real explanation for the haunting. But he also couldn't explain what had happened in the lab. At least, not yet. "What are you doing out here?" he stammered. He still felt adrenaline coursing through his veins. Looking for you, Avi," Michael said with a worried frown. Don't want you to miss the bell, or you won't be able to go to the concert. Your parents will ground you faster than you can say Neverland." That was the hit single from the Lost Boys' first album. "Yeah, we've got to hurry," John said, tugging his arm. "It's about to ring any second." Barry followed his friends back to class. They dashed through the door right as the final bell rang. Mr. Bates shot them a chastising look from the front of the room. He'd scribble a bunch of horrible-looking fraction problems on the board. They looked like a foreign language. "Glad you could join us," Mr. Bates said with a scowl. All the other students were already seated at their desks, ready for class. Barry and his friends made a beeline for their 3 empty desks at the back. He could tell Mr. Bates was itching to mark them tardy, but they'd beat the bell and made it just in time. Sorry," Barry mumbled, taking his usual seat between Michael and John. He slumped lower in his seat, hoping to avoid further trouble. That had been close. Too close. As Mr. Bates launched into their first lesson, fractions, Barry couldn't stop replaying what had happened in the science lab. The taps turning on by themselves, how the water smelled and sounded exactly like the ocean, the thumping noises coming from the closet, the long curly black hair clogging the drain, the sword stabbing at him from the sink. He couldn't shake one terrifying thought, even though he knew it was impossible. "Captain Hook is haunting me." It shot through his head, making his heart pound even harder. But ghosts weren't real. There has to be a logical explanation for all of this. "I just need to search for more clues," he reassured himself. The cases in his books all started the same way, with a haunted house or boat or island where it seemed like there was a real ghost terrorizing the inhabitants. But the kids' slowaways always found a perfectly run-of-the-mill explanation that proved there wasn't actually a ghost or anything supernatural. "Students, time to turn in your math homework," Mr. Bates said, pacing the aisles to collect it. Groans echoed out, accompanying accompanied by the rustling of paper as everyone pulled out their worksheets. Math homework. Oops. Perhaps throwing away his assignment had been premature. Mr. Bates reached Barry's desk and held out his hand. His shadow fell over Barry. I don't have it, Barry said, searching for an excuse, even a wild one to explain. But his mind went completely blank. I threw it away, simply couldn't cut it. Mr. Bates frowned. Come see me at my desk, Mr. Young Man. We need to discuss this. Michael and John shot him concerned looks. They'd both turned in their assignments. That was it. Barry was in trouble. Now he'd never get to go to the concert tomorrow night. Mr. Bates was sure to call his parents and tell them. This was the second school day in a row that he didn't turn in his homework. He would get grounded for sure. Uh-oh, John mouthed, dragging his finger across his neck. Michael just lowered his head. They both knew what this meant. Feeling sick to his stomach, Barry rose from his seat and followed Mr. Bates toward his desk. The class got started on the math problems that Mr. Bates had scrawled across the whiteboard. Fractions. They were awful, though apparently algebra was worse. Look, I'm really sorry, Barry said before Mr. Bates could say anything. He lowered his head in shame. I don't have an excuse for why I didn't do it. Just go ahead and punish me. Call my parents. Send me to the principal's office. Do whatever you have to do. Mr. Bates blinked at him. His eyes looked odd suddenly, unfocused. Punish you? He said as if confused. Yeah, for not turning in my homework, Barry said. Why would I punish you? Mr. Bates said. Last week I had to miss recess, remember? Barry said. That's what happens when you don't turn in your homework. You get punished. Mr. Bates glanced around, then lowered his voice. Right, other normal kids get punished. But you're special. You don't need to do your homework. Wait, what? Barry whispered back. You're excused from all future assignments, the teacher said, still not quite looking Barry in the eye. It was as if he was under a spell. No more homework for you for the rest of the year. Wait, what do you mean? Barry said. Heck, instead of doing those boring math problems, Mr. Bates went on, why don't you draw or play a fun game? How does that sound, kiddo? You're serious? Barry stammered, unable to believe his ears. It was a dream come true. No homework? Of course you don't need to do schoolwork either, Mr. Bates said, tapping his hands on his desk. Since you're never going to grow up, you're excused from that as well. Just don't tell the other kids, okay? They might get jealous. It'll be our little secret. Barry stood there in shock. Had Mr. Bates really just said that out loud? Okay. Barry returned to his desk as his teacher blinked rapidly, as if snapping out of his trance. Barry's heart raced in excitement. This wish was even more powerful than he could have ever imagined. He'd expected that staying a kid forever would be amazing, but he didn't expect his teacher to excuse him from doing homework. Actually, not just homework, any and all schoolwork. When the school day ended, Barry hadn't done a single assignment. He had goofed off in the back of the room all day. He doodled cartoons in his notebook and played games on his phone while everyone else, including Michael and John, had worked hard on their lessons. Right before the final bell, Mr. Bates passed out their homework. He'd whisked right by Barry's desk. Hey, want to hit the skate park? Barry suggested, with a grin as he and his friends gathered their things. Ugh, we've got so much homework, Michael said glumly, stuffing his papers in his bag. Fractions suck, John added. Come on, homework can wait. Let's have some fun, Barry said. What do you say? Michael and John looked torn. Finally, they both smiled. Lost Boys forever, they cheered. As they headed home to grab their skateboards and hit the park, Barry could feel the hooks weights in his backpack. As long as he had it, he wouldn't have to grow up or do homework. Of course, ever since he'd taken it, some weird, creepy stuff had been happening to him. But there was probably a perfectly logical explanation for all of it, just like in his books. He felt a stab of guilt. He knew he should still return the hook. It was wrong to take something that didn't belong to him, but then he thought about all the amazing things that were happening to him now that he didn't have a birthday. No homework for the rest of the school year? It's not like he had to return it right away. It had been hidden for a long time, hadn't it? As he skated with Michael and John down their street toward the park, he felt a rush of excitement. He loved being a kid more than anything. He loved playing with his friends. He was so glad he'd made that wish. Barry and his friends had so much fun at the skate park that they lost track of time. Barry hurried home, but still arrived after his curfew. His stomach twisted as he popped his skateboard into his hand and approached the front door, knowing his mom would not be happy. The door opened before he even got there. Gulp. "How's it going, kiddo?" His mother greeted him with a smile. She handed him a plate of homemade cookies and a sugary soda. "Have fun with your friends at the park?" Barry glanced at the clock, wondering if he'd gotten the time wrong. Nope, it was clearly after 7. Great, Barry said, but won't this ruin my dinner?" He added hesitantly. Usually she would never let him have cookies or soda on a weeknight, especially not right before dinner. "Whatever do you mean?" Mom said, blinking. Just like his teacher earlier, she wasn't quite looking at him. "These are your 2 favorite treats. I baked the cookies just for you. Don't you want them?" Barry studied his mother, unable to believe what he was hearing. This spell just keeps getting stronger, he realized. "Thanks, Mom." Greedily, he accepted the treats from his mother. It was almost too good to be true. "What do you want for dinner?" Mom went on, setting her hands on her hips and smiling at him. "Mac and cheese, chicken fingers, more cookies?" She was listing off his favorite kitty foods, which she never made him anymore. When he was younger and a picky eater, she'd make him separate meals. He'd get chicken nuggets and fries while everyone else ate grilled chicken and rice. But for the last couple of years, he'd had to eat what everyone else was having, including healthier adult foods, like green vegetables that tasted like dirt or vomit. He couldn't believe his luck. His mouth watered at the prospect. "All of the above?" he ventured. He still expected her to change her mind, or make him pick one option. "Sure thing," Mom said in a cheery voice without missing a beat. She walked briskly into the kitchen, pulling out the mac and cheese box, his favorite kind with the fluorescent orange powder. "Anything for my favorite little guy." "What about ice cream too?" He knew he was pushing his luck, but he had to try. "Of course," Mom said, looking up with a warm smile. "Chocolate? Better yet, I won't make you wait until after dinner to eat it. Why don't you have some right now?" Best day ever. Giddy, Barry started to set the table, his usual chore before dinner. But his mother shot him a confused look. "You don't need to do that," she said, her eyes still unfocused. "It's your sister's job to set the table, remember? Why don't you go watch the cartoons until it's dinner time?" Barry broke into an evil grin. That's right. Rita could do his chores. She was all grown up after all. He settled into the sofa and flipped on his favorite sci-fi cartoon with the baby alien and the space wizards. As the robots beeped and blipped across the screen, chasing the alien, he sipped his soda and munched on the cookies, feeling the grainy sugar coat his tongue. His mother dropped off a heaping bowl of chocolate ice cream, which he ate all the way to the last bite. Dinner went even better than expected. He got mac and cheese with cartoon-shaped noodles, crispy chicken fingers with ranch dressing and barbecue sauce, more cookies, and chocolate ice cream, plus soda to wash it all down. It was the single best meal of his life. Everyone else had to eat dry chicken breasts, brown rice, and spinach. Barry couldn't fathom how leaves were considered an actual food. They were inedible. Rita seemed to share his sentiment, pushing the spinach around her plate unhappily. She kept shooting him jealous glances. "Rita, eat your veggies," Mom said. "You're 16 now. Start acting like it. They have important nutrients." She pouted. "Ugh, Can't I just take a vitamin? It's like science. You love science. Your mother worked hard to make dinner, Dad said, and we both worked hard to pay for it. Stop complaining. You're too old for that. Why doesn't Barry have to eat? Why doesn't Barry have to eat spinach, she said, shooting him a spiteful look. Your brother's still just a kid, Mom said. You know that. You're 16. Soon you'll be in college. It's time for you to grow up. That's right, Barry said, shooting her an evil grin. Eat your veggies. Rita glared at him, taking a grudging bite of spinach and grimacing at the acrid taste. If looks could kill, he'd probably have dropped dead on the spot. But Barry didn't care. He just grinned at her and stuffed another cookie in his mouth. He ate until everything was gone. Mom even let him have another serving of chocolate ice cream. He wolfed it down, savoring the sweet, rich sweetness. As he slipped into bed after playing video games for hours, he was certain that this had been the single best day of his life. Even if he hadn't gotten to have his birthday party and his triple fudge cake, staying a kid was the best thing that had ever happened to him. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Barry woke with a start. It was dark outside. He sat up in bed, his mouth clamming from all the sugar he'd had earlier. He felt exhausted, and his brain felt foggy. He had stayed up much later than normal for a school night. Barry rubbed his eyes, letting them adjust. Then he gasped as what he saw above his bed. Slash marks were gouged into the ceiling in a jagged X pattern. Barry stared at them in shock. Feeling his heart pounding, he stood up on his bed and reached his hand out. He ran his fingers over the slash marks. They were deep, and they were very real. Scratch, scratch, scratch. There was that sound again, coming from under the bed, like something was scratching at the floorboards. It's just another nightmare, he thought groggily. None of this is real. His head was thick with sleep. He had a serious sugar hangover. Hadn't he read somewhere that too much sugar could act almost like a drug? It could probably make you hallucinate if you had too much of it. Maybe the third helping of ice cream wasn't the wisest choice. I'll just have 2 next time, he promised himself. As if hearing his thoughts, the noise stopped abruptly. Slowly, Barry leaned over to peer under the bed. He gazed into the thick darkness, but saw nothing, just blackness. Hello? Is someone there? He whispered. He held his breath and stared, squinting in the dark. The last thing he saw was a flash of silver aimed right at his face.